Well, we've got 40 people in the room, and I think that's as good as time as any to start this shindig. I had some questions here I wanted to answer, and for me to type the answers, I've got to reach around my microphone, and suddenly I'm in a position where I'm going to get carpal tunnel or something. So, somebody asked Dan Hale. You said recently you might get a new Ford. You punch the dash if it starts throwing commercials at you. Any chance it's going to be an Explorer? Oh yeah, it's a good chance. I'm actually going to get another Ford Explorer because I've now owned 5 or 6 of them and they've all been flawless for me. Now, of course, if they start throwing commercials and advertisements at me, they might not be flawless anymore. But mechanically, they've all been great. My brother worked at Ford for a long time, so I get A plan. And I've got a very good friend who is a salesperson at a dealership. So I think that's a route I'm going to go. I'm sure I'll do a video and an update at that time. So we'll see how that goes. Apparently, the 24s are still out there. They got great financing, and they do not have the capability to do what Ford just patented, but the 25s might. That's the question. And of course, DePaul says, I remember when Steve smashed his Fitbit on video. I forgot about that. I had a Fitbit and the screen went bad on it. And if you do a research at that time, you discover that it was a common problem. The screens would just go bad and there's no fix. And I was so annoyed by it that I took it out my front yard where I had a rock with a really, really nice flat surface on it. And I brought out, I believe, a sledgehammer. And I said, hey, everybody who's got one of these Fitbits, I've got something here that'll if you're annoyed by this, that'll make you feel better. So take your Fitbit, put it on a flat surface and do this. Now, I had so many angry emails from guys going, I was hoping I'd get a fix. And here you are smashing yours. And I'm like, dude, there is no fix. That's the whole point. Ember Miss 69 afternoon, Steve and all. Irving Johnson, hello. Nora Technology is my favorite lawyer. Acoustic G string. Hello, everyone. Could have a double meaning there. Stephanie Howe checking in, I believe, from Maine. Former President Dick Vaney. Hello from South Brazil. Oh, Lowell Riggs, I am. When I was traveling with a carnival, it snowed on us in mid-May. And the Canadian robot lady is in the house. Thank you very much, my dear friend. Spoke to her on the phone yesterday at length. And she said she could check in today, schedule permitting. I believe that means that her schedule has permitted. So CRL here and accounted for. Kevin Kuntz checking in from Pennsylvania. Sig Sauer, Big Steve, hello, my comrade. Haven't been called comrade since the last May Day parade, but I'll take it. Dr. Rick, hey, Steve, great to see you. Chuck Whitehead, good afternoon from Jonesboro, Tennessee. Scott Summers, hello. Scott, of course, is a name I recognize. And JP checks in from sunny and not as warm South Carolina, but JP's a dear friend of the show and a good friend of mine. We've hung out on a couple different occasions. Came to the Dream Cruise a couple years ago. Spent a few hours watching the cars drive by. But JP checks in and often tells me all about the various places he travels because he is a world traveler. Ted Wigman, good afternoon. And Graham Stewart, hi, Steve. Pete Nikolich, howdy, Steve. Sarah C., hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. And Sarah's a good friend as well, as is Scott Argyle. And MH08 checking in also. Dan Hale, did you get my package with the 1/18th scale model? I believe I did. Oh, I apologize. I got a bunch of stuff this week. What did you send? I forgot. You know, after a while, it becomes a blur. My mail gets out of control. I mean, absolutely out of control. I got 14 shirts, not this past week, but the week before. But I also get all kinds of other non-shirt stuff, which I'm very happy to get. And if I can fit it on the set, I will. Sometimes it takes a bit to work its way in, but it'll get there. Hot Rod L says my C10 does not track my driving. Yeah, I love the old cars that don't overthink things for you because they don't think. I'm in control. Let me drive it. And just stop trying to become self-aware. Emmanuel Guerra, have you ever known a lemon law lawyer to go through the process to sue due to a bad car? A couple. I actually knew a guy who defended lemon law cases and he filed a lawsuit against a manufacturer. And I said, wait a second. Every time my client sues your manufacturer, you claim it's buyer's remorse. I go, well, aren't they going to say it to you? And he goes, well, no, my car is defective. Scott Bicknell, you missed a car show at the Packard Proving Grounds. Yes, I did. I have not been to many car shows this year, sadly. I forgot when that one was. The Packard Proving Grounds are kind of over east towards. Are they in the Macomb County area, or are they a little bit north of that? I always forget where the cutoff there is. Kind of over towards Romeo, sort of, generally speaking. And I hate to speak in vagaries, but this morning, of course, we had Navy Gate because I made the mistake in my video talking about an NCO, which of course stands for non-commissioned officer. And the story that I was getting the story from talked about an officer doing something. And of course, she was a chief petty officer also, which was her rank. And so the word officer was being thrown around a lot. And I had quite a few people who are very, very astute and into the Navy terminology. And they said, well, Steve, technically she's not an officer because when we use the term, we refer to non-commissioned officers as not officers. Commissioned officers are officers. And I actually had a guy go, this guy's so stupid, doesn't know the difference between non-commissioned and commissioned officers. Despite the fact I didn't say anything about that. In fact, in the story on 3 different occasions, I gave her exact rank. But a non-commissioned officer, whether you like it or not, is a type of officer, okay? But I did change the title in the thumbnail to cause, in an attempt to stop people from freaking out because they were freaking out. I'm surprised I didn't get any angry emails, but maybe it was too soon. But yeah, a lot of people. And it reminded me of the debate over Bronco because I did a story where a guy had a Bronco Sport that had problems. And a couple of times I didn't say Bronco Sport, I just said Bronco. And I had people going, oh, dude, it's not a Bronco, it's a Bronco Sport. If you go to Ford and look at their page back then, under Bronco, it says we sell 2 kinds of Broncos, the Bronco and the Bronco Sport, but they're both Broncos. Obviously, that's why we call it a Bronco Sport. It's still a Bronco, okay? And by the way, it had nothing to do with the story, okay? And so in this case, the fact that she was an NCO versus a commissioned officer, the reason they're pointing out that she was any sort of officer, non-commissioned or otherwise, was that she should have known better. That's the whole point of the story. So, but you know, we also know that 1,000 people will watch, 10 people will comment, and 1 of them will complain. So there you go. John Nowak Jr. checking in from Corpus Christi, Texas. Howdy, Mr. Lehto from the Iowa Horse. Although I put the article "the" in front of your name, I guess just Iowa Horse. Obie Jackson, hi from Northeast Texas. And Dan Hale says hello to the Robot Lady. And somebody sent me a sticker that they wanted me to put in the set, and they called her the Canadian Lady Robot. And I'm not sure how they got those reversed because Canadian Lady Robot's not as, to me, appealing as Canadian Robot Lady. But I could be wrong. What of says, yay, live Lehto. JJ CEO 40 says, I just read a news story that says Jimmy Hoffa could have been buried under the old Brewers Stadium at third base. It's getting to the point now where it's speculating about places he may have been buried. And I am still to this day convinced that he was grabbed. I suspect he was probably deceased within 20 minutes of being grabbed. And his body was probably incinerated about 45 minutes after that. But if you want to go with the theory that somebody transported his body several states away to prove a point or to crack a joke, you can go with that. But until they actually dig one up and find something under one of these spots, because remember, he's also supposedly buried underneath the Meadowlands or possibly under the Renaissance Center. And so they keep moving it around as to where they might be. Nakota Kids is first time participating en route home to Farmington Hills from a weekend in Johannesburg, Michigan. Johannesburg, that doesn't ring a bell. Farmington Hills, of course, does. I had an office there for many years. I like that area a lot. Scott Big Nelson says, bring a trailer car show this morning at PPG in Shelby Township, 22 in Van Dyke. Yeah, I'm not going to make that. It's great driving weather outside. It's 64 and sunny, but the only downside is that it's cold. And I'd love to get the Cobra out this afternoon. Don't know if I will or not because it's a bit chilly. And you don't realize how chilly it is until you're in a vehicle like that driving along. And it's got heated seats, but that's pretty much it. So, Mark Heil, good morning, Steve. Good morning, Mark. How you doing? Ben Leach, yo, Steve, sorry I'm late. You're 5 minutes and 26 seconds late according to my big clock. My big clock is actually fast. I've got to check it. Not a banned account says, why must Fifth Amendment rights be invoked to exist unlike other rights? It's not that you have to invoke them to make them exist. They, of course, exist the entire time. But there was a time years ago where police officers would just simply start asking you questions. And if you said, I don't want to answer your questions, they go, too bad. They just sit there and ask you questions. And so the Supreme Court said that due to the relationship there, where most people, when they're confronted by the police and are being grilled by the cops, feel they have an obligation or might not understand that they've got a Fifth Amendment right to shut their mouth. And so they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make the police notify the person of their right to shut their mouth. And so I've mentioned before a long time ago, and this is the kind of thing that makes people want to argue with me, and I wish they wouldn't. If the police arrest you and start reading your rights, if you just shut your mouth, just keep your mouth shut. You don't have to say anything. Do you understand your rights? Keep your mouth shut. If they ask you a question, just keep your mouth shut. But the point is that if you want them to stop questioning you, all you've got to do is say, I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights, and they have to stop. That's the key. So the Constitution, the Bill of Rights didn't say you've got the right to remain silent and the right to tell the officer to stop questioning you. But the Supreme Court has said that that does in fact exist. So Joe Lee says, Johannesburg, Michigan is up north, as we say about everything from N20 to the bridge. So you're telling me it's south of the bridge? That's not up north. I'm just kidding. I spent the bulk of Labor Day weekend on the other side of the bridge. Made it up to Paradise, the Tequamanon Falls area, St. Ignace, spent some time on the island, as we say, and so on. So DB says, hi, Steve, this is Daryl. I was the one who sent you the update on the judge who handcuffed the girl on the field trip. Oh, that was a fun story, wasn't it? But a horrible situation. And like I said, you read those things. You read those things and you go, how do things like this happen these days? Seriously? But again, there are some judges out there who let the power go to their heads. Tank O Military, I'm assuming that's an O as opposed to a 0. You opted into a subscription to use your heated seats. My Cobra, I actually did get with heated seats. And there was a large debate as we sat around the table discussing this, Mark Lieberman and myself. Mark Lieberman's the dealer who ordered the car for me. And he said, Steve, it comes with, you can order heated seats, you can order a heater, you can order air conditioning, you can order all kinds. You can order a supercharged big block if you want to. And I said, do I really need heat or heated seats in this thing? And he goes, well, think about the mornings you drive to Cars and Coffee and you get up and it's still kind of duskish out, but you're getting up and the sun's going to be coming up. And you get your car fired up and you roll it out of the garage and the air temperature is like 50. Now, it'll warm up as the day goes on, but as you're driving down there, you're going to be freezing. So I actually got the heater and the heated seats. And I don't think those are too big of a concession to comfort. Did not go with the AC. Okay, so that to me would be a parasitic draw that I would not want to deal with. Not a banned account, firing questions at me fast and furious. How is civil asset forfeiture found constitutional? Through some very, very bad gymnastics intellectually. We've discussed this before. I've done so many videos on civil asset forfeiture. The average person would look at it and go, wait, civil asset forfeiture is obviously a violation of the Fifth Amendment. And that is where the police pull you over and they go, we're not going to arrest you, we're going to take your stuff. And if you want your stuff back, you got to sue us and prove that your stuff is innocent. And of course, doing that, they reverse the burden of proof, which makes no sense. And the problem is that hundreds of years ago, I'm talking about back to the king, there was a time when contraband could be seized by the crown and you had to sue to get the contraband back. And most of the time people wouldn't do it. So if you were smuggling something and they grabbed it, even if they couldn't prove you were smuggling it, they'd say, well, we're going to grab this stuff. You want it back, you got to sue us for it. Nobody would do that. And it just kind of just crept and crept and crept. And it got to the point. So it's gotten out of control. And I think they are now working on it. I think eventually they'll get it straightened out. Chromazine says the custodial interrogations are multi-tiered. If you're in a custodial interrogation, then your Fifth Amendment right to not provide testimonial evidence against yourself applies. And yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not going to go into a diatribe on the Constitution here. It's a fascinating topic, but I took a constitutional law class in law school, and it's an entire semester. It might even be 2 semesters, con law, but you cover it again in a bunch of other classes too. And of course, we're talking about at what point you have the right to not be a witness against yourself. And so, for instance, the best example I can give you is the police officer asks you what your name is. And I get arguments about this all the time, and you can argue all you want, but the problem is that simply asking somebody their name has been held by courts to not be an interrogation. So you can disagree with that, but they're allowed to ask. Now, if you don't answer the question, that's another story altogether. But the point simply is that they can ask you some things, but also it's a custodial interrogation, meaning that they've taken you into custody of some sort. And I'm not going to get into that either because there's all kinds of law on that. Sometimes it varies from state to state, believe it or not. But the real question is, police officers walking by and he goes, "Excuse me, did you see what happened here?" You can take the fifth. Just shut up if you want to. But the point is that you say, "I'm going to plead the fifth in that, your officer." They're going to go, "Well, I'm just asking if you saw what happened. I'm looking for witnesses. I'm looking for you." So. MHO8 says 2 seasons in Minnesota. Winter's here and winter's coming. They also say that summer is basically just 2 weeks of bad snowmobiling in the middle of July, right? Proverbs 17:11 says, "I'm on the job in New York. I don't Mirandize anyone unless I know they're not free to leave." Yeah, and that's the real question is you can say that they're not free to leave. Do they know that? And that's always the other argument, because I've seen cases before where the police walk up, start questioning somebody, and the person thinks I'm not free to leave, but they don't ask the question, and so the police are thinking, well, if the guy wants to, he can leave anytime he wants, but he hasn't yet. So there is a grayish area in there, and that's why a lot of times they end up having hearings on this and big old fights over it. Joe Lee says it's not the UP, but everybody says up north till you get the bridge, and it's in the UP. Didn't you used to work up north? Well, the joke is, I remember growing up in Birmingham, Michigan, Oakland County, just north of Detroit, and I had friends who'd say, "I'm going up north." And I go, "Where are you going?" And they'd say, "I'm going up to Midland." And Midland is like here, it's like, okay, that's not even in the upper half of the lower peninsula. And of course, I could say, well, on the other hand, my family vacations in the Keweenaw, which is over 500 miles of driving from where we're sitting right now at that time. That's up north. But of course, it's a matter of degrees, okay? But in my mind, I always thought of it as being across the bridge. Up north was up north and below the bridge was down south. But of course, I don't live on the bridge either. So. Oh, Donald Myers, greetings from North Arkansas, sitting on top of an old Deutz tractor. Deutz? At least it's not a Hoyt Clagwell. That's what they had in Green Acres. Hoyt Clagwell, which never seemed to operate properly. Not a banned account. How much cash is it illegal to drive with or mail? Well, that's a trick question because it's not illegal to drive with cash domestically. But the cutoff point that often seems to draw their attention is $10,000, because if you deposit $10,000 in cash into a bank account, the bank will notify the feds that you just deposited $10,000 in cash, and they'll issue a thing called a CTR, and that receipt will go to them, and of course they'll track that and whatever. But generally speaking, it is not illegal to drive domestically, it is within the United States, with any amount of cash. Otherwise, armored trucks would be breaking the law. But of course, they say it's suspicious when you're driving along in a vehicle and they pull you over and they discover that in the back seat is a duffel bag filled with bundled, cash that totals out to be $780,000. And when they ask you where you're going with it, you say, "Oh, I'm going to buy some construction equipment with cash." And they go, "Oh, that doesn't make any sense." And they take the money from you, and then you just sue them to get it back. And that's what we're trying to resolve right now. And sadly, some states have passed laws limiting their ability to do civil asset forfeiture, but unfortunately, the feds still do it. And the feds won't stop until there's national legislation on it, or until the Supreme Court strikes it down, which they're unlikely to do because they've upheld it so many times. So those are questions that we've asked and dealt with on many occasions. Real Jingy says, hey, Steve, if the Supreme Court says I must invoke my fifth in order to be protected, why not start any interaction by invoking the first, fourth, fifth, and the ADA and reasonable accommodations? Well, no, the Supreme Court doesn't say you have to invoke it to be protected. Like I said, you can just sit there. You can. You don't have to invoke it. So if you just sit there like a bump on a log and don't say anything, you're invoking your fifth by passively doing it. So, I mean, if you want to, you can invoke all of them. You can invoke every amendment past the Volstead Act if you want to. But it was an unusual situation because the Supreme Court said, based on the nature of that particular interaction, police officer pulls you over. They've got power over you. They have authority over you. They've made you stop, for instance. Let's suppose you're driving your car. So they make you stop. They have now stopped you. So they've kept you from going where you want to go. They've limited your mobility. And you and I both know that when you're in that situation, you feel vulnerable. How long is this stop going to last? Are they going to get me out of the car? Are they going to arrest me? Are they going to search my car? What are they going to do? These are questions that could go through your mind, is what I'm saying. And so the Supreme Court said, because of that, we're going to make the police remind people that they've got the right to invoke the Fifth Amendment. That's all. But so. Catherine Giles, if I visit Michigan next summer and I like flowers and water, where would I visit? Well, if you like flowers, you go to Holland. They've got a tulip festival there every year. Holland, Michigan. Look up Holland, Michigan tulips, and you'll find more flowers than you can shake a stick at. In or near Midland is a place called Dow Chemical, but they've also got some very, very beautiful botanical gardens near there as well. You can look that up. And then also, if you like water, Michigan has the largest, I believe, or the longest shoreline of any state, at least freshwater, in the United States, because we border 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. And so if you like just beautiful shoreline, I yesterday had the opportunity to drive from basically Alpena down to Standish on the Huron shoreline, the Lake Huron shoreline. And it's gorgeous. And you're passing through these little tiny towns like Eau Gray and Omer, which of course is the smallest city in Michigan, according to their own green sign at the city limits. They're the smallest city in Michigan. But I know they're also, at least they used to be, the home of the Sucker Festival. Sucker's a kind of a fish. Paul Van Santvoort, Steve, can you confirm your Wikipedia entry? No, I hate Wikipedia doing things like that. I'm not going to get into it. Don't even. Sorry. Kevin Thomas, have you ever visited the Chrysler Turbine Car in St. Louis? I've been to St. Louis a couple times. Never saw the Turbine Car. It was supposed to come to a car show I was at, and I did not see it there. I've spoken to Turbine Mike, who takes care of the car, but it's one of the few turbine cars I've never seen with my own eyes. That and the Smithsonian car, I think, are the last 2 that I've not seen. So I've driven 5 of the 5 that run. I've driven 3 of them. So DB, I can see driving internationally with over $10,000 being questioned. Oh, of course, and that's the point. Is if you cross the border, leaving the country or coming into the country with cash, they will ask you, are you bringing cash across the border? And here's the thing. If you report it, it's not against the law. Failing to report it is a violation of that law, the reporting law. But if you do report it, then they go, why are you doing this? Where are you going with this cash? And they start questioning you about it. And again, at the border, they'll question about all kinds of stuff. Fat Blue, is there a website to support the Big Annie Fund? I'm not sure. They're putting up a statue, hopefully, to Big Annie Clements, Clemenc, Clements or Clements. And that's happening up in the QAnon up in Calumet, Michigan. I do not know if they have a dedicated website to it or not. I hope they do, but I'm not familiar with it to check. So, Skipper the geriatric Chihuahua. Hey, caught alive, lucky day from Oregon wine country. Oregon wine country. The Liquid Theory says it's still summer here in Arizona. Kung Fu Grip says $10,000 now is not like anything of the $10,000 from 50 years ago. Are these very old amounts still being enforced? Ridiculous. Yeah, on some level, there's like no rhyme or reason to it. It's just a number they picked. I'm sure they just said, well, 4 digits is one thing, 5 digits is another. Randy Pablo says, did you hear about the dyslexic alcoholic who's always walking into bras? Not a banned account says the policeman foot in the front door, a legal loophole. You know, I get asked that one a lot, and I'm not sure. I apparently it's happened or something. So I don't quite know. I don't quite know where that's coming from, but it would have to have more story to it than that. Because if a police officer shows up at your front door and you crack the door and just say, you know, what are you doing? Can I help you? What's going on? Because I just want to talk to you. If you went to slam your door and he stuck his foot in your door, well, he's actually gone beyond what you've done. You opened the door to talk to him. You didn't open the door to let him put his foot in, right? So you could argue at that point and say, okay, he's gone beyond what I acquiesced to. So that would be the argument I would make. So I'm sure it's going to depend on facts, unfortunately. DePaul says Michigan is the Great Lakes state. Yeah, we put that on our license plates quite a bit. The Great Lakes state. Mark Miller, any thoughts on a 2.7 liter and 3.5 liter internal water pump EcoBoost? And then it becomes a routine maintenance or wear item where once in a while he's got to go in there and replace the water pump, because otherwise, if it fails, it destroys the engine. And I've never liked that design thought process, but I know they do it for a reason, because they have such small space to work in. They go, hey, we put the water pump in here, but it's kind of like timing belts, right? And this is something I'm going to go to my grave on. Timing chains, okay, last longer and make more sense, but timing belts are cheaper. And people go, but yeah, just you replace your timing belt every 60,000 miles, you're fine. And I replace my timing chains never. In my entire life of every vehicle I've ever owned, I've never had to replace a timing chain. However, I had one or two cars with timing belts, and I've had to replace timing belt more than once. So I've got a thing about timing chains versus timing belts. I've mentioned before, I wrote an article about that for Jalopnik, and a guy threatened to kill me because I'd taken that position. He actually threatened to kill me for saying that I think timing chains are better than timing belts. Dr. Rick, what it's like driving a turbine car. It's interesting because they sound so different. And that's the first thing you notice is the sound. When you fire them up, you hear this whooshing noise like a gigantic vacuum cleaner, and you realize, oh, that's my that's my power source. That's cool. But they actually drive pretty much like just any other typical car of that era. The steering is kind of light, and they drive along, and there's not a ton of lag. People always assume there'd be a ton of lag, you know, like turbo lag building up as it's not that bad. But, you know, you would have gotten used to it real fast. So Ember Mist 69 with car makers trying to get subscriptions and make more money after the sale. Yeah, it's something they do. Scott Summers, stop in to listen to music in Oscoda. Actually, I passed through Oscoda yesterday, and there was a festival of some sort going on. I couldn't make out what it was from the road because I saw people milling about, and I saw a stage set up, but I wasn't sure if it was a festival or a show or what was going on. So if you could let me in on that, I'd appreciate it. But I did see that yesterday. But unfortunately, I went to a funeral yesterday. And so my time was kind of focused on that. And then, you know, so I didn't have a lot of extra time. GH Dave 0113 says exactly $10,000 is okay. CTRs generated for over 10,000. You know, but I know a lot of people who are so paranoid about that they deposit $9,999. And then what happens is they accuse you of structuring to avoid it, which is kind of like saying you're speeding if you break the speed limit, but if you're going just under it, you're trying to avoid that. Yes, I am. Isn't that good? No, it's not. It depends. Ad Libertor, have you heard about the interpolation controversy seems going around in music right now? Of course, Rick Beato, one of my favorite channels on YouTube. He's a great guy. He is a great guy, and he's a musician, a record producer. He runs a recording studio. He's a musical teacher. He's a wonderful guy. Look up Rick Beato, Beato. And he is pointed out, and I've heard this, and I've seen other people point it out, but he points out very clearly how there's modern songs where they clearly have just taken the melody or the hook from some old song and just redone it and stuck it in their own song and said, yeah, I wrote that. And once in a while, they'll credit the original source, but sometimes it's blatant. And I've heard songs where I'm going, isn't that song the same as the other song? And so apparently they are trying to justify this by saying, well, we're not stealing the original music, we're interpolating it. Not interpreting it, interpolating it. And interpolation, I think, is a description of when you take something and reorder it for some other purpose. I think that's kind of what they're talking about. And simply because you relabeled it something else, it's kind of like if I said, well, I didn't really steal your wallet, I adversely possessed it. What? Oh boy. No name coder. Hey, Mr. Lehto. S. I'm not sure that's my initial or what we're talking about there, but whatever. Mike Ellis, also follow Rick. No, Rick Beato is a great. Rick Beato is one of those guys. When you see his channel, you go, "This is why the internet was invented," because he's a fascinating guy. But no one's going to go, "Hey, let's go find some guy who can talk about music and give him a TV show," or "Let's go find some guy talking about music and give him a radio show." But there are enough people on the internet, millions, who will subscribe to this guy because what he does is so entertaining, and his topics are so diverse. He'll pick songs and he'll go, "Hey, here's a song. Let me explain to you why I think this song is great." And they say, he calls them, why this song is great, and he'll go through it and analyze it and deconstruct it in ways that I'm not a musician, that I'm like, oh my, it's fascinating. And then on the other hand, he also did a long form interview with Tony Levin the other day, the bass player from King Crimson, and of course Peter Gabriel's touring band. And I've mentioned before, I love both these guys, but I love Tony Levin. Tony Levin is if you ever watch any live videos of Peter Gabriel, he's a bass player, but he sometimes plays a Chapman stick. But he's a multi-instrumentalist, plays all kinds of stuff. And he's a fascinating guy to watch because he's doing all kinds of it's not like straight-laced traditional bass playing, and but it works, and so he's this brilliant aficionado. And so when Rick Beato interviewed Tony Levin, your fear is, oh, these two guys are operating at a level that it's going to be up here, and we won't be able to understand it. And Rick Beato's asking him great questions, and Tony's giving great answers, and it was not at this expert only level that other people couldn't understand. So I found it utterly fascinating. I remember I saw that. I'm like, oh, it looked as an hour and a half long. And I'm like, yes, I want to see that long form interview. Mike L says the long form one-on-one interviews have been fascinating, and they have. And he's now gotten to the point where he can get people on there who will sit down with him who are very big names. And he's got such a huge audience, so it's great. Agent Ned, good morning, Mr. Lehto. Wonder where you are. Solid Pixel says we used interpolation in math class to estimate an unknown number in between two known numbers. Yeah, and again, I think that's they're talking about like kind of like I don't know how they do that. Mark Miller says, so would Weird Al Yankovic be considered interpolation? No, my understanding is that Weird Al approaches the songwriter and says, can I use your song? Because he's going to use the music of their song without question and simply redo the lyrics to make it funny. And so he acknowledges them, pays them, but yeah, it's an interpretation. But redacted info says timing belt is quieter. Before or after it snaps? Wade Hampton says, Steve, I'm a Chapman stick player. Have you seen Tony Levin play the stick? It's fascinating. What's interesting too is he'll play it clearly on songs that he could be playing a standard bass on, and it's set up in such a way that you can do that too. So Volga says Weird Al would be a parody. Yes, he would be, but he does, like I said, I know for a fact he does pay the songwriters, and I know he's also approached some who've said, no, I don't want you doing that. And he's actually said, fine, I won't. Canadian Robot Lady says, I always learn a ton about music from watching Rick Beato shows. And Dan Hale says, Weird Al always reaches out to people that are going to be parodied in his songs. So Steve is so awesome that you know the Chapman stick. Many don't. Tim Nossum, thank you very much. I was half expecting a comment going, this guy doesn't even know what a Chapman stick is. But no, I'm just kidding. Engine Fair says his interview with Brian May was very nice. Yeah, that's another good one. And it's always interesting. You know, if Larry King interviews somebody, it's softballs that are so low hanging and dumb that it's kind of like, hey, Larry, do you even know who this guy is? But, you know, Rick Beato approaches it and says, in essence, look, Brian May is a legend, and I'm going to treat him as such. But because I'm a musician and my audience loves music, I'm going to ask this guy the questions that aren't going to insult his intelligence, and they're not going to be so technical that only he and I understand them, and we'll all get something out of this. You know, absolutely fascinating. Tom Tampa, have you ever been to Beaver Island? No, I have not. Beaver Island's a little island up here off the Pinky of Michigan. It's famous because at one point in time, a guy moved there and declared himself king and wanted to be king of Beaver Island. And amazingly, somebody actually unalived him, and he was no longer king. And some people were wondering if that was the government's shorthand way of just saying, you can't do that. But you never know. JP says, I saw Beetlejuice yesterday. It was pretty good. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Have not seen it yet. I will admit I've watched the original. I'm not a huge fan. I know people were freaking like, oh my gosh, it's coming out. It's coming out. So there you go. Volga says, I hope a third is coming. Ember Mist 69 says, I goofed and I tried to write the question. With car makers trying to subscription and make money after the sales, could we see this coming to the housing world? Oh my God. This gave me the willies. Also, when do you think owning a car as we know more? That's an interesting question. I don't think it would ever come to the housing. Among other things, I'm not sure. Like, someone actually buy a house and they said, oh, by the way, to use the front door, you got to pay a subscription. I don't think anybody would stand for that. But cars as we know them, it's hard to say. I'm curious to know what the electric car market portion will be 20 years from now, because I'm seeing more and more electric cars on the road. I am. But of course, like I said before, I won't buy one until we get the range situation resolved where I can take one on a long road trip. But I've thought about buying one just to putter around town and just plug it in at home and never buy gas again. That'd be fun, But unfortunately, the way America is set up, with the vast spaces between places, and that rhymed, you pretty much have to have something because mass transit won't cut it. But, Americans who go to England or Europe I'm talking about like mainland, are always fascinated, as I've been when I've been over there, about how well their mass transit works. So, I mean, you could take a plane, land in London, jump on a tube at the airport, go to downtown, jump on a train, it'll take you through the tunnel, and you can pop out outdoors in France at the Gare du Nord, and that'll be the first time you've been outdoors. And you just landed in London and got to Paris, and it was all using subways and trains and such. And so it's a whole different thing, but also they don't have to cover the same kinds of spaces we have here. And we tend to like being mobile. I like to be able to jump in my car and drive to Chicago or drive to Des Moines, So I'm not sure when the cars themselves will go away. Lois Miller says the king of Beaver Island had about 15 wives and a bit of a cult going on. His neighbors weren't impressed and brought their weapons to his house. That's one theory. Yeah, it's kind of funny, that polygamy thing seems to annoy a lot of people, but there's still some of it going on. So, Michigan Farm Boy says the Weird Al lyrics are parody, but generally his band plays the actual music, and that's another thing. Also, don't forget that if you heard a Weird Al song and couldn't make out the words, you might think it was the original. Brandon C., in your opinion, how hard is the bar exam? Is California's harder or easier? Well, the bar exam is a 2-day exam in most states. Some states it's 3. California's is 3. I'm going to talk about the bar exam I'm familiar with. I know that a lot of states are moving away from the traditional bar exam Some states have other alternate paths to go where you can intern and clerk or whatnot. But I know that when I took the bar exam, it was 2 days, and there was a full day of multi-state, multiple choice questions governing general law, and you had to score a certain score above that to pass. And to study for that, I took classes, I read books, I took practice exams, and I did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of study for that. And I also passed the bar exam on my first try. But the second day, which is also just as important as the first day, was 6 hours of essay exams. So 3 hours in the morning, maybe 2 hours in the afternoon, but it's either 5 or 6 hours of essay questions. And the essay questions were literally like you handwrite out 10-page answers to them. And I forgot what the bar pass rate was when I took it, but it was in the 60s or 70s. And so to think that 30 or 40% of the people who take the exam would fail after having gone to law school, had time to prepare for the exam, have seen previous exams, that shows you it's a pretty difficult test. California, however, added a third day, and the third day was a performance exam, and that was literally all bets are off. It could be anything. And I know that one year they walked in and they said, "Here's your exam," and they hand you something, and it was a transcript of a trial missing the closing argument. And there's a memo on top, and it goes, "You've been notified that the senior partner of the firm had a heart attack and died last night, and he was trying a case. Here's a transcript up to the closing argument. You now have 3 hours to write the closing argument." So the first thing is you got to read the transcript of the trial, and then as you're reading it, you got to figure out what the laws are we're talking about here, what the witnesses said, who was good, who was bad, and then write the closing argument that you'd make to the jury. And that's technically something you should be able to do. It would be an emergency and be a crazy situation. But and so, you start writing, and the answer is literally you're writing out a script in essence for the closing argument. And then another year they hand you a stack of papers and go, "These are the financial papers for somebody who's about to die, plan their estate." It's like, what? So the pass rate on the California traditional exam was lower than you might guess, but because of how difficult it was. So it's not like somebody could walk in off the street and just take the exam and pass it. And don't tell me about Frank Abagnale, because he did not do that. So there you go. Signata says, "You talked about the Italian Hall disaster in the past. Have you ever discussed the Bath school disaster?" I have not on this channel. I've talked about it before, and I'm very familiar with it. There's a town called Bath near Lansing, Michigan. And a long time ago, in the 20s or 30s, there was a guy there who was really, really angry about how he was being taxed. And he thought his tax dollars were going to waste because he was paying for, in essence, among other things, the local school district. And either he didn't have children or he didn't have many children. And he became so enraged by this that he carried out one of the first terroristic acts of that sort in America. And he blew up the building and also a car he was driving loaded with shrapnel and killed a whole bunch of people. And it's one of those wild stories. And it was all over the news, obviously, back then. It's not talked about so much now, but I've been to the site before. They've got historical markers there, and they actually saved the cupola from the top of one of the ends of the schoolhouse. And there's a park there now with signage and explains the whole story. And it's a crazy story. I was actually considering writing a book about it at one time, but another friend of mine actually had just written a book about it. So I thought, oh, okay, there goes that. Sally Vela says, "Was that Ponzi? Did I miss a story? Did I miss a question?" Brent Adams, "What's a long road trip to you? I drive an 1,100-mile one-way road trip on average 4 times a year. An electric vehicle is far from my future." So here's the thing. For me, I do a 500-mile drive. To me, that's not long. I do that all the time. I jump in my car and drive to Copper Harbor. So that to me is not that big of a deal. I've done longer drives before. I've driven to California a bunch of times. I've driven to Florida a bunch of times. I've driven to Georgia. I've driven a lot of places. Although Atlanta is deceptively close compared to lower Florida. But yeah, to me, if it's going to be longer than a day long, like if I'm going to be driving and stop and get up next morning and drive some more, that's a long road trip. But if I can knock it off in one day, I don't consider that a long drive. Norm Larson, on the California third day, can you ask for a continuance? They should give you extra credit for asking, but no. I can tell you that a couple of years ago, there was a guy who was taking the bar exam in California, and somebody next to him, I believe they had a seizure. I could be wrong on some of the details. He had a medical emergency where he put down his pen and started helping this guy until help came. And then when he got back up, he continued working and he ran out of time. And he asked for more time, and they said no. And they just said we have to have a hard rule on that, because if we allow this, what's to happen next time when somebody says, "Oh, yeah, I was helping this person out," and I don't know how it eventually resolved itself, but I do know at the very beginning they denied it. Travis Williamson, Esquire, says California allows graduates of unaccredited schools to take their exam, but they have to take the baby bar after 1 year. And there are a couple of good schools, such as Lincoln and San Jose, but most are marginal. And I don't want to get too heavily into that either. I went to law school in California, but the point is that you can attend some schools, and then you take this thing called the baby bar, and if you pass that, you can then continue your education, and eventually they will let you sit for the California bar exam. But I'm not licensed in California. I have a lot of friends who are, but I am not. So there you go. Just saw a couple of things pass by I want to talk about, but of course it goes. Norm Larson, does Jay Leno have a BMW Isetta? I'm not sure. I remember a lot of vehicles from his garage, but the stuff that I considered to be too pedestrian, I wasn't paying attention to. And no offense, but my friend Mark Lieberman's got a couple of them right now. He's got a bunch of micro cars. He's got some Messerschmitts. John 2000 L. Is it an L or is it an exclamation mark? So I've watched you for a long time, but I've missed your live programs. I've never been able to contribute to your fantastic work and efforts to keep us informed about critical legal issues. Thank you. Well, thank you, my friend. And I appreciate that. I really do. And, it's kind of funny. I didn't bring it with me. Sitting on my kitchen table. I got the nicest letter from somebody the other day. I went to my post office box. I pull out a bunch of T-shirts like I always do. And on top of that is a letter. Just a letter typed me, I believe, from St. Louis. I could be wrong on that. And I can tell it's an old-fashioned letter with a stamp on it and everything. So I open it up, and this guy just goes, "Steve, I watch your videos. I love your videos. I think what you're doing is great. I think you're a credit to the legal community. And I really think what you're doing is educational, informative, and it appears to me that you're pretty much on the right side of things, and you bring a lot of things to our attention, like civil asset forfeiture and so on." And so he goes, "I want to let you know that I'm a viewer, and I appreciate your work." And I actually took the letter, and I've now read it to everybody I've met. Just forgot to bring it up this morning. But the thing about the internet, you have to understand, go read the comments under random videos on the internet, and you'll see people arguing about everything and anything. I mean, it's amazing the stuff people will argue about. And after a while, it gets tiring to be reading the comments under videos. You spend a lot of time working on a video, and somebody goes, "Oh, this video is stupid." And you're like, "Hmm." And so I had a guy just this morning send me a note and say, "Steve, fire your editor. Your editing on your videos sucks." Now, if he knew that I'm the editor, I think he would have phrased that differently. I don't think he was trying to be funny. I edit my own videos. But the funny part is that he thinks I should fire myself. So I'm not sure how that would work. Dan Boyd, some of those Folkers were Messerschmitts. Morgan Free, why choose to go to law school all the way in California? I'm sure Michigan has some fantastic law schools. It does. I applied to the University of Michigan. They wouldn't let me in. But at the time, Southwestern University School of Law in Los Angeles had a program called SCALE, Southwestern's Conceptual Approach to Legal Education. And the SCALE program at that time was the only accredited 2-year program in America. So there might be one now. I don't know, but I know Southwestern still got theirs. But 2 years, you checked in July of 1 year, and March, the second year after, you left. So it was actually less than 2 years. And I actually thought, gee, I could spend 2 years in California or 3 years in Michigan This is the one time I'm going to go and do it out of state. So there you go. Alan Brown Sr., good morning, Steve. Alan from Scappoose, Oregon, checking in. Canadian Robot Lady says, Steve, we can fire each other for editing and voiceover work. Cliff Olinger says, SCALE, yes. Southwestern's conceptual approach to legal education. So at Southwestern, when I was there, they had a traditional program, they had the night program, and they had the scale program. So scale was 2 years, traditional is 3, and the night was designed to be done in 4. I think you could do it faster if you wanted to, if you could fit it in. But generally speaking, that's how it was designed to work. And so the other programs were larger. And the scale program, for the most part, we were actually kept in one room because it started off with like 70 students and graduated in the 30s. So about half the class washed out. So Paul Harris says, an editorial on the editor. I like the edits. It's clear it's an edit. It proves you're human. Yeah, the person was complaining about the volume. And here's the thing. Now, as soon as I say this, when people go, oh, Steve, your volume is off. When I put up videos that get hundreds of thousands of views, some get millions of views. And once every 12 months, somebody goes, oh, the volume on your videos is off. And no one else complains, just that one person. I don't think it's me. I think it's you. But I could be wrong. Steve, are you going to watch the new Beetlejuice movie? I probably will. Have not seen it yet, but somebody else chimed in earlier. JP said he liked it, 7 out of 10. Canadian Robot Lady says, Steve's got close to 2,000 outros from her. It might be more than that. I haven't counted. We started a numbering system a year or two back. But I have outros of hers scattered across several computers. Mark Bartholomew is going to counterbalance the criticism by saying, I think your editing skills are outstanding. Your work is unbelievable. Keep it up, my friend. God bless you and God bless your family. In Jesus' name, you are the only lawyer I find entertaining. Thanks. Well, I appreciate that, my friend. Thank you very much. Discussions with Ekmal, checking in on my lunch break. Morgan Free, I'm sure scale was really intensive. I thought about going to law school here in Georgia, but UGA is expensive, and Georgia State is too far from me in Atlanta. That's the one thing about law school is it is expensive. It is expensive. And now, don't get me wrong, I graduated 33 years ago, so we were using different dollars back then. They were worth a lot more. But I graduated with a lot of debt. A lot of debt. They will lend you all the money you want, and you'll be able to pay it back most likely. But I felt bad until I met somebody who went through medical school, and they told me how much debt they had, and I'm like, what? I didn't know numbers that large were possible. So. CM Matz, much love from Toledo. Thank you for checking, my friend. Stephen Cook, Steve, I've never watched a video of yours without laughing many times. Our sense of humor matches so often. I like the fact we have that in common. Well, there you go. I appreciate that. Stephen with a V. Oh. STP World, did you hear about the Hellcat driver? He's still out. The judge didn't really do much. You know, I followed this story a little tiny bit. I never did a video, but there's a guy who owns a Hellcat of some sort, racking up all kinds of tickets and complaints about driving and noise and all kinds of crazy stuff. And he's been busted a few times, but apparently they can't stop him. And that of course is a problem. So hopefully they'll do something to step up the enforcement on that. So JP says, now you've got the Canadian Robot Lady saying outro. That's what we called it in the business in America. And apparently in Canada, you see extra, intro and extra, but here it's intro and outro. Obvious Captain, do you know any lawyers from North Carolina you would recommend? Not at the top of my head. I do recommend Romano and Stancroft on lemon law cases if they're in your state. They're in about 26 or 28 states right now. They're based in Michigan, but they have a nationwide practice and they're rolling it out to more and more states. But more often than not, if you've got something else, I don't know anybody, I apologize. Scott Summers says, yeah, if you're FIGER to be able to pay off your student loans. Rex Foucher, the person who keeps everyone happy, is called a politician. And yeah, they try to keep everyone happy. And generally speaking, by the time the dust settles, no one's happy, and they've skedaddled with some money that they somehow got their hands on. CM Matt says the University of Toledo engineering program can get wild with load debt. I guess playing with robots can be expensive. Yeah, I've heard that. It's sad because the price of education has gone up so much. I don't mean to be like the old guy shaking his fist at clouds, but there was a time when, for instance, if you served in the military for a little while and you got access to the GI Bill, you could get a job and work your way through college and graduate with a degree and no debt. It's possible. I've talked to people who did it. And now they graduate with a degree and they want, start making payments. I remember going to sit down with someone at a bank and talking about perhaps getting a loan, and they go, "Oh my gosh, these are your student loan payments." And I'm like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Yeah, you're basically paying for a house you don't get to live in because these payments are the size of a house payment." So, Roger Sliney, greetings from Australia. Thank you for checking in, my friend. Ted Wakeman, what do you think of one-hit wonders? Which one do you think is still played today? I think it's Walking on Sunshine, Katrina and the Waves. Oh, no, I love one-hit wonders. I love one-hit wonders. We could talk about them all day long. And then, of course, there's all kinds of subtopics therein. But we've talked about music quite a bit here, and musical taste is odd. There's songs I love that other people don't like, and neither of us are wrong, as I like to say. But I love me a good one-hit wonder. There's a bunch of them out there. Tapao, Heart and Soul. But a lot of them come to mind. Yeah, I took my watch off, by the way. It's banging on the desk over here, but I've always got the watch nearby, so don't worry about it, in case you're curious. Discussions with ECMO. I just sent an email. Chicago Deputy Police Chief charged and turned himself in, caught slashing tires in uniform during a parade. That's the kind of thing where if there's an ounce of truth to that, like, how do you defend that? Don't you just walk in and take your belt off and your badge and lay it on the desk and go, "I'm done here," leave, and hope they don't charge you with a crime? I mean, what else are you gonna do? Nabil says, "Steve, I watch all your videos at 2.5 to 3 times speed. Whenever I see you in live, it seems like you're talking in slow motion." I've had people tell me that, and I occasionally, if I'm watching a really long video, will speed it up because YouTube can do that. They can play it at 2.5, 3 times speed, and you can understand it doesn't sound too goofy. But I do sometimes talk too fast. So I've never listened to myself at increased speed, but I suppose it's possible. Leon Major says large numbers of uninsured drivers are still jacking up insurance rates. Why haven't states cracked down on this? Some states it's 30% of drivers. I heard that number as being one that was thrown around when I lived in California. And when I was in California, I actually got rear-ended by somebody. I stopped at the lights, boom, plowed into me. And I walked back there, and the first thing she did is hand me her insurance card. And I called a friend of mine. I said, "I just got in an accident. What do I do?" And he goes, "Well, what happened?" I said, and she told me that she handed me an insurance card. He goes, "Oh my God, you got hit by somebody with insurance." He goes, "That's a miracle." Like, that was the shocking part. She had insurance, not that she hit me. They really need to crack down on that. They need to. And it's unfortunate, but in Michigan, for instance, if you want to get full boat coverage on an expensive car and you live in Detroit, for instance, it's going to cost you a fortune. If you live out in the sticks and you've got a beater, as they say, a beater with a heater, and you want just the basic bare minimum PLPD coverage, which is just what you can get away with driving, it's not that expensive. But unfortunately, a lot of people budget themselves and they go, "Okay, I can pay this much for a car, and this was the cost to maintain it, blah, blah, blah." And then the insurance kind of falls by the wayside because the car keeps running without it. And unfortunately, I've heard so many times about people who were hit by an uninsured driver, but I've also known people who got in accidents when they were uninsured. And in Michigan, you lose. So let's suppose you're driving down the road one day and you are in a vehicle that is not insured. You're driving your own vehicle and it has no insurance on it. And a drunk driver runs a red light and T-bones you and climbs out of the car and goes, "It's my fault. I'm sorry I did it. I'm drunk." Cops show up, write a bunch of tickets, and you're severely injured. And you call up one of them advertising attorneys on the television and say, "I got hurt in an accident, got T-boned by a drunk driver in broad daylight who admits fault." As soon as you see, "But I have no insurance on my car," you're going to be hearing a dial tone real fast as they hang up on you because there's nothing we can do for you. It's in the code. And so it's a surprise to many people. They go, wait, I can't sue somebody? Yeah, you shouldn't have been on the road. That's the thinking. So again, the rationale behind it is you shouldn't have been out there. Now, I know people say I had to drive, I had to get to court, or had to go to work or something. It's the same thing driving without a license. You're playing a dangerous game, and it just depends because it can catch up with you. DePaul 99 Luft Balloons, of course, by Nina, and then of course it was covered. Actually, it wasn't covered so much as she did a version in German and a version in English. In her English version, she said 99 red balloons. And I actually had someone tell me once that Luft meant red. I said, so you think the Luftwaffe is the red Waffe? Okay. Oh boy. Signata says, and they'll change the payment amounts on your student loans because they can. My payments doubled last year for the private loans, and the only reason they didn't triple was that I had to extend the loan to 30 years. And I think I talked about it briefly. It hasn't quite taken off the way I thought it would, but there was a movement a few years ago where people could actually sell, in essence, a lien against their future earnings in exchange for a loan from another party. And so people would actually find someone who's going to school with a very, very valuable degree, like a medical degree, a legal degree, engineering degree, and so on, and say, I'll lend you the money, but you've got to pay me back this exorbitant amount of money that I'm going to take out of your future earnings. But it's not a student loan in the traditional sense. And I did a video about that a few years ago, but I've not heard much since then. So I'm not sure. Maybe it hasn't taken off yet. Harry Selden says, I like the story where you went to see Alan Parsons and your car got ticketed by the eye in the sky. Oh, yeah. Oh, so Leon Major says there is uninsured motorist insurance. That just means all of the money comes out of insured drivers. Yeah. And it's unfortunate because I've heard of some horrific accidents caused by uninsured drivers. And unfortunately, and this is going to sound weird, but it's something you have to realize is true, is there are bad drivers out there. Okay, let's just start with the presumption that there are bad drivers. The bad drivers get tickets. They don't pay the tickets. They get fines. They get points. They lose their license, and they keep driving. They get ticketed for driving on a license. They keep driving. Guess what their insurance rates would be if they had insurance? They'd be through the roof because they're bad drivers. So they lose their insurance. So next thing you know, it's a bad driver with no license, no insurance. And so I know people who've driven their entire lives, no tickets, never been pulled over, never had a problem, never been in an accident, no claims, no nothing. A flawless, blemishless record. Okay? Counter that with the other person who no insurance, no license, horrible driving record. Which of those two is more likely to get in an accident tomorrow? Probably a bad driver. So unfortunately, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you're right. So James says, I like the German version better. Yeah, and speaking of that, like the question is, of course, whether you consider Falco a one-hit wonder, because Rock Me Amadeus was his big hit in America, but he had Der Kommissar, and he also had Vienna Calling, which is a great song. But he had an inclination to switch between English and German in the same song. So Stuff Writer says, Hertz wants to sell me a timeshare RV. Only if you take it to an electric car race in NASCAR. Lowell Riggs I am says Luft means air in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany. Yes, Luftwaffe, the Air Force. Douglas Gaxiola says ska punk band Goldfinger had a minor hit with a cover of 99 Red Balloons. I've never heard that. I'll have to check that out. One thing I'm surprised by, and it's pretty cool, is you go into YouTube, you can look up a song and go covers, and it'll show you covers of, you can find them that way too. And I'm always amazed when I find a good cover of a song. I'm like, oh, I kind of like that one. Terry Reid's cover of Hole in the Moon by the Waterboys is a great example for those of you who are into that kind of music. Reinhard, man, did you miss the video about the Cobra? I haven't done a video about the Cobra yet. I hope I hope to do a video soon. Time just gets away from me. Bob, blah, blah, what are the hours of your petting zoo? For those of you who follow me on Facebook, you know that almost every day I post photographs or video of animals that I encounter on my travels, most of them in my yard. So we, of course, had the woodchuck, who we've only seen once since then. I've only seen a woodchuck once since then. He was far from the house. On the other hand, I've seen deer, raccoons, possums, fox, coyotes, rabbits, frogs, turkey vultures, sandhill cranes, ducks, geese, woodpeckers, and the list is endless. And they're all around me. So I do tend to I try to photograph them when I can. Nabil R says Johnny Cash's cover of "Hurt" is really good. One of the reasons that worked so well is he's got such a distinctive voice, and his voice sounds pained. So for him to sing about pain, it was just the perfect fit. Absolutely perfect fit. So, Dill Pickle. Hi, Steve. How do you pick the t-shirts for your videos? The videos, t-shirts are drawn from 2 garment racks on the far side of my studio over there. And when new ones come in, they go on the right-hand side, and I wear them, and I take them off, and I put them on the left-hand side, and they work their way through. And then eventually, as new ones come in, old ones rotate out. And so I probably got, I don't know, thousands of t-shirts now. But I prefer ones about places, schools, cool brands. People send me them for restaurants and brew pubs and breweries. That's fine. I don't want to be political. Can't be obscene. There's a few I've gotten that are borderline. But if you send me a shirt from a school you attended, I don't care how small the school is, I'll wear it. As long as it fits. Double XL. Blue herons are so pretty, says Volgus. I agree with you, my friend. The blue herons are beautiful, as are the green herons and the egrets. We have a lot of them around here. I've not had any blue herons on my property, but I've had, like I said, the sandhill cranes. But sandhill cranes spend more time out in fields. Blue herons are almost always in and around water, unless you're talking about where they nest. They often nest at the tops of dead trees and swamps. And I don't have any dead trees coming out of swamps on my property just yet. Give me time. Oh boy. Ram 50 V8 says we're going to discuss odd music. How about Pat Boone singing heavy metal? I remember that, but Pat Boone's always bugged me because he was one of the guys who in the early days of rock and roll would cover songs by black artists. And so Blueberry Hill came out and Fats Domino sang it. And they released the song, and radio stations would play it, or they'd be reluctant to because it's a black artist. So Pat Boone would record a safe version by a white guy. I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill, and it just wasn't the same. And there were some radio stations that would say we're only going to play the safe versions, and he made a lot of money that way, and it always bothered me. But you know, I don't know if I wouldn't have done the same thing as a young musician trying to make it, but. Josh says sandhill cranes are huge. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Ash says, I wish they made a gaming recliner. I can still stand without cracking my knees. Vertivo says, you ever thought about becoming a politician? Briefly. Not now, but a while back, I lived in an area where the current state representative in Lansing was term limited out. He was going to be leaving. And I actually did the math on it. I realized that if I simply got myself on the ballot, there's a good chance I could win. And I started working on it a little bit, and then I moved. But if I hadn't moved, I might have tried. But I hate to think about it because, you know, nowadays, if you run for any office, I don't care if you're running for dog catcher, they're going to run attack ads. Did you know this guy beats his dog? I haven't even got a dog. You probably killed it. So, oh boy. Dan Hale says he did say he doesn't want to be a judge, so imagine being a politician would be the same. Pretty much. I think if you said, Steve, you have to do one or the other, that'd be a tough call because being a politician, that's cushy. They get all kinds of vacations and time off and spending money in an office, all kinds of crazy stuff and privileges. And let's face it, you get campaign donations that, you know, might be able to work their way through a petty cash fund. So, Lowell Riggs AM says that I was a politician when I was on a condo board. Yeah, technically I was. I was elected. I was elected to that position. I don't put condo board member on my resume. I wouldn't do that. Ginny Figueres is checking in and apparently is tired. I apologize. Am I keeping you up? I remember in law school, there was a woman who sat in front of me whose name I will not say out loud, but I do remember her name. And she fell asleep in class once. And the teacher just looked at her and stopped. And everybody looked and people started snickering. And then somebody sitting near her tapped her and she woke up. The professor goes, "Am I keeping you awake?" So, Sally Vela says employers will require employees to use their unicycle with a stationary kickstand to use as their workstation seat and then just ride their seat home because they can't afford to own a car. Well, of course, it'll save the employer money buying chairs also. I used to be able to ride a unicycle. I can't anymore. I haven't tried in a while. But when I was a little kid, two of my older brothers had unicycles and could ride them. So at one point in time, I think all of us could, or most of us could. But I had a unicycle. I used to ride at the store and buy stuff and ride back carrying stuff in my hands. And I've got an older brother. We're all older, but who in more recent years got a big wheel unicycle, which allows you to go faster and cover more ground. And he's still quite adept on the unicycle. So there you go. Chuck Whitehead, have you ever seen a judge lecture an officer for what he did wrong for issuing tickets? I'm trying to think. I've seen judges throw out tickets. I've seen that happen a lot. But no, I can't think of an example of that. But I mean, I've seen a judge sit through the testimony of an officer and then at the end just go, I'm not gonna find him responsible for this. So, but it's been a while. Drawing Momentum says best strange music was Leonard Nimoy. Well, don't forget that Captain Kirk did some stuff too, right? I think he did a cover of Rocket Man, didn't he? Duncan Campbell, what about DA? I wouldn't want to be a district attorney either, because that's the worst of both worlds. That's an elected position, so you got to run for office. But then number two, you're the one who makes the charging decisions on stuff. And so someone comes into your office and goes, "Hey, there's this really, really emotionally charged case we have no evidence on. Can we charge this person?" And so now it's like, do I not charge the person and risk ticking off the voters? Or do I charge the person knowing that they don't have a lot of evidence on this? So KJ Lee says, do you mentor law students? I have followed you for years from starting journey to law school, but I enjoy the way that you explain the law and have a deeper understanding from watching you. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer questions for you. Send me a note and say, "Hey, Steve, I'm a law student or about to be a law student. Here's where I'm at. Can I ask you some questions? I'd be happy to help you." I've actually talked to some other people. I've actually met people and talked to them who have gone to law school, and they say they started watching my videos long before they were considering that. And so if I inspire you to do that, great. I'd be happy to help. So Agnes Congdon says, singers didn't get to make their own decisions most of the time for business or choosing songs. The machine was the boss at the time. Yeah, but it's been something that's been around forever. I mean, don't forget that, Marilee Rush's Angel of the Morning was covered by Juice Newton, almost note for note. And I heard an interview with her where somebody asked her, they said, "Well, what do you think of the original version?" She goes, "I never heard it." It's like, come on. Oh, boy. So, yeah, William Shatner, Jerry Brown. I called him Captain Kirk. Lowell Riggs IM says hearsay and conjecture are types of evidence. Well, interestingly, hearsay is got its own category in the rules of evidence. And so it'll actually say, here's what hearsay is. And then it'll say, hearsay is generally inadmissible unless it fits the following exceptions. And then there's pages and pages and pages of exceptions. So when somebody objects and goes hearsay, the judge will look at the other side and go, "Do you have an exception?" because it might be an exception to hearsay. So interestingly, a lot of people who are not attorneys will hear someone say something, well, that's hearsay. Okay, doesn't make it not true, so there. Fatty Butterpants says, I'm at work, so I'll just say hi and go back to work. Get back to work. Ad Libertor, if you had to do one, which would it be? Buy an RV or be a judge? Oh, I'd buy the RV. My expectations would be lower, and I'd know what I'm doing in the sense that I'd be looking forward to a lot of difficulty down the road. But I have no intention of ever buying an RV. I have no desire at all. Zero. Canadian Robot Lady says, I love Juice's version. Yeah, but go back and listen to the original. The original is perfect. There are some songs that don't need to be covered, and that was one of them. So, Padre says, my cousin swears I named my son after James T. Kirk. Is your son's middle name Tiberius? Oh, boy. Mike Lackner, have you ever seen a judge bust up laughing at someone's stupidity? Oh, not really. I mean, on YouTube I have, but not in person. I limit things to things I've seen with my own eyes in real life. I can't think of any examples. I mean, I've seen judges crack jokes on the bench. I've seen judges laugh at jokes on the bench, but nothing that really stands out. Bill Van Ram, ever been to Goodwood? No. I've not been to Goodwood. Goodwood, of course, is where they hold the Festival of Speed in England, which took place in the past shortly ago. And it's a huge car event. I'd love to go to Goodwood. I'd love to go there. Just have not been there yet. I might go there someday. We'll see. Padre's son is named Kirk. Kirk. I knew a guy whose name was Kirk, and he got the license plate Kirk out. Kirk out. Douglas Gaxiel. Are there any cover songs you think are better than the original? Yeah, the obvious one is All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix. Go listen to Bob Dylan's version and then go, okay, how did Hendrix hear his version come out of that? Hendrix was a genius, not because of how he played the guitar. He was a genius because he actually imagined Bob Dylan's version becoming what he did. And so in my mind, that's the best example, although I'm aware of a few others, but that's the key. Harry Seldon, ever laughed at something that was really funny in a courtroom yourself? Again, I can't think of an example. Canadian Robot Lady, Juice's song fit into country music in the early 80s, so I have memories of wailing along that song like at 4 a.m. early mornings in the air. Oh, yeah, no, and that's a funny thing is that they put Juice Newton's version, although it was a crossover hit. It seemed to hit, I believe it hit the top 40 of Billboard in America. But because of Juice Newton's past and her typical genre, that got a ton of radio airplay in the country scene as well. But it was treated as a pop hit also. But, the original version of it was just so good. I remember when it came out, I'm like, oh, God, you have to cover everything. Jeannie Figueroa, so excited to see you live with a thumbs up and a bunch of hand claps. Dill Pickle. Hendrix's version of the Star Spangled Banner. I wonder, to this day, I wonder how much deep thought Hendrix put into that, or if he just walked out and just did that. Because he'd be capable of doing that on the spur of the moment, So, Mike Geertz, how many artists did versions of MacArthur Park? A lot. Don't forget there's a disco version. But of course, that's someone left a cake out in the rain, and it was covered a ton of times. Also covered a ton of times with the song Feelings. Feelings. Nothing more than feelings. Talk about, read the lyrics to that. I don't know why that song popped in my head a while back. And so I went and looked it up, and I was reading the lyrics, and I'm like, but the song wasn't as huge of a hit in America, but apparently it was a worldwide phenomenon. So it was huge. So NZ Kiwi NZ, hello from New Zealand. Thank you, my friend, for checking in. Of course, Kiwis are what we call the people from New Zealand, but it's also a small flightless bird. Actually, I don't think they fly. And I've got some friends in New Zealand. Haven't been there yet, but I'd like to go someday. Greg S. says, Little Wing is another great song covered so well by many. Rennerman says, Steve just said Tiberius. Isn't that James T. Kirk's meaning of the letter T? Oh, James Chmelik says Homer Simpson does yummy, yummy, yummy. Really? I'm trying to think about that one. Harry Selden says Cab Calloway did about 10 different versions of Minnie the Moocher. And what's interesting is I believe, and I could be wrong, and this could be apocryphal, but I know there's a story about how he appeared in the Blues Brothers movie. And my understanding is that Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi were just huge fans of his. And they basically got him to come out and do the appearance. And because of that, a whole new generation found out who he was and heard that song. Believe in yourself, trying to forget those feelings of love. Sequence 77 is wishing a happy end to summer and start to the fall. Oh boy. KWLDWD, the man, says the Gong Show had a whole show where everyone sang feelings. I'd forgotten about that, but I'm sure I saw it at the time. So I watched the Gong Show religiously. And don't forget that AGT, America's Got Talent, is basically the Gong Show, just updated for a modern audience. Perishable Goods 13 says Jimmy Fallon covering Reading Rainbow done in the style of the Doors. Jimmy Fallon's a musical genius. He absolutely is. Look up his version of I Whip My Hair Back and Forth as if he was Neil Young. There is absolutely no way that you would not enjoy that if you like comedy, Neil Young, or even the song I Whip My Hair Back and Forth. Oh, Michael Lawless says there's a documentary called A Lawyer Walks into a Bar about a California bar exam, or about the California. I've not heard of that. I'll have to check that out. Michael Krause says, I'm assuming unicycles cut down on bike theft. Yeah, it's kind of like stealing a car with a manual transmission if you don't know how to drive a clutch. Sequence 77 kids are funny. They hear an old song, a TV show, and they swear it was new. Hey, did you hear that new song by that new band called Journey? What was it? Guardians of the Universe, which revived a bunch of songs, including Blue Sky by ELO. And I think Take On Me by Aha was in another movie, Ready Player One. And these songs, when people hear them, oh, that's a great song, and suddenly they get a big bump in popularity. And it's kind of interesting because radio has a problem where top 40 won't play something that's not in the top 40 right now. And many stations, once they retire a song from the playlist, won't bring it back. And so some of these songs fall into that category. They're great songs, but nobody will play them because they don't fit a format just perfectly. Lowell Riggs I am. I miss shows like The Gong Show. TV went downhill after Wings went off the air. Wings. Forgot about it. I've seen Wings recently. I forgot what channel it's on. But it's very reminiscent to the feel of like Cheers or Frasier or something. I think some of the creators were involved, the same people. So Guardians of the Galaxy, Sequence 77, yeah. Harry Selden says the old joke about where Dean Martin studied law but never found a bar he could pass. Take America Back. Mean Gene, the dancing machine. The greatest thing about the Gong Show is Chuck Barris, who was involved in that. He created the show. And the first year they had a professional announcer, right? The guy came out, from Burbank, California. And then he just said, screw it. And he took over the hosting abilities. And he had no ability to host, but he didn't care. And so what happened was it just became like amateur hour for everybody, including him. So, William Ford says Whitney Houston's Star Spangled Banner hit the charts, but I Will Always Love You is obviously the most successful cover. Yeah, her version of I Will Always Love You went insane. And I know Dolly Parton's quite happy about that. Shinigami Kaio says more cowbell. We can always use more cowbell. I need to know who the writer was who came up with the concept of more cowbell on the Saturday Night Live skit. It is without doubt my favorite skit ever on Saturday Night Live, and there have been some funny ones, but more cowbell is just ingenious on so many levels. So many levels. Morgan Free says it drives my husband's nut. I'm sorry, it drives my husband nuts. I didn't have plural husbands. It drives my husband nuts. Our 97.1 Atlanta Classic Rock has such a strict classic rock genre. They basically play the same songs over and over again without much deviation. And that's the complaint I've got about every format out there for the most part. Oldies stations and the classic rock stations just have these limited playlists. They almost never change the playlist. And so I got news for you. If you're an oldies station right now and you're playing Brown Eyed Girl, stop. Just stop. I love Van Morrison, but we've heard that song too many times. And so you need to pull that song out of rotation, give it a rest, find something else by Van Morrison, play that instead. But there are some songs they just play over and over. And by the way, some songs never should be played at all. Going to the Chapel by the Dixie Cups. That song should be outlawed. There should be a law against that song existing. Sorry, a little bit over the top. Choo Choo 405 SNL is 50 years old this year. That's funny. I remember when Saturday Night Live started, and it was one of those weird things. It was on so late on Saturday night. You know, back then, because I was of the age where I wasn't allowed up that late at night. So some of my friends saw it, some of my friends didn't. And you hear these stories like, "Did you hear what happened on Saturday Night Live? Oh my gosh!" And it was back then. It was so cutting edge. It's gone up and down over the years, but it is, you know. Say Oss's Wikipedia listed Will Ferrell and Donnell Campbell as writers of the More Cowbell skit. I believe it, but I want to know, did Will Ferrell come up with the idea itself? Did he actually come up with that idea? You know, somebody had to come up with the idea and say, hey, look, let's have a music producer whose only contribution is more cowbell. Valerie Ant's Jackie Wilson said, of course, Van Morrison's got a huge catalog, and because it didn't quite fit rock and roll, it didn't quite fit adult contemporary, it kind of got missed. Bill Van Ren points out Moondance, great album, great song. So Duncan Campbell said on to Christopher Walken likes more cowbell. Really? I thought he had a fever, and the only cure for the fever was more cowbell. Charles W., I want your D104 microphone. That's the microphone. You can't see it very well, but it's right there. It's next to the tall Shure. Stephen Cook says SNL came right after Monty Python, I think. Same general era. Of course, Monty Python in America, for the most part, would have been on PBS. And then Saturday Night Live, of course, would be on NBC. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and I actually read an article, and this is not apocryphal, this is true, that when Monty Python first started airing in America, and PBS was carrying it, and it was chopped up, but it was, you know, it was Monty Python, the skits, and the Flying Circus. And there was a reviewer, a TV reviewer, I think out of back east someplace, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New York, whatever, as if Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are near each other. And he said he saw some episodes, and he goes, number one, this is the dumbest show ever put on TV. Americans are going to hate it. It won't make anybody laugh. I watched it. I didn't laugh. This is the stupidest thing ever put on television. And then he goes, for example, there's this stupid skit built entirely on the joke that no one expects a Spanish Inquisition. And here we are 50 years later, and you know what I'm talking about? And he didn't think it was funny. So there you go. There you go. Alan Johnson, Van Morrison, Tupelo Honey. Of course, problem that song is probably a little bit too long, but what a great song. Steve Berwanger, Saturday was Don Kirshner's rock concert. Oh, that was great. And I'm curious to know why they didn't do things like that later. They must not have done well or something. But you have a band come out and do one or two songs, you know, and it's I've seen shows like that from the BBC, for instance, but not here in America. Drawing Momentum, need a radio station that plays the whole album. Believe it or not, and some of you will remember this, but there was a time when radio stations like WABX in Detroit on Sunday night would actually pick a couple albums and say, we're going to play Dark Side of the Moon all the way through from 8 o'clock until whenever it ends. And then when that's done, we're going to take Led Zeppelin 4 and play it side 1, side 2, all the way through. And they would actually run tones at the beginning so you could set your recorders. And it annoyed the heck out of the record companies because they're like, you guys doing that means people are taping the music at home. They're not going to go buy the albums. And on some level, that's probably true. But there are also other people who would hear the album and go, hey, there's a track I never heard before. You know, so, but they used to do it for only one evening of the week. And it was usually, I believe, Sunday night. I could be wrong, but I believe it was Sunday night. But I remember reading an article, and the guy complaining goes, they actually ran tones. So you could set the recording level on your recorder. I mean, come on. So Padre, it's an ex-parrot. The parrot is no more. Madame Lestrange or MD Melestrange, could be Dr. Melestrange. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. DePaul, Dick Clark, American Bandstand. Dick Clark, of course, the sad part was I'm pretty sure that everybody came out there and lip synced. And I'd like to see a show where they perform live, but I know it's not always possible. Top of the Pops, for instance, famously, they mime everything because they have to do the unions and so on. But Canadian Robot Lady loved the old Monty Python. Rob Windress's K-Mod in Tulsa would do that now and again, play the full album on a Sunday night. I think that's one of those things that got picked up by other radio stations. I know a lot of different programs would get borrowed from other radio stations in other markets. So if you hear it one, you'll hear it in another, most likely. Take America Back says, I sold $20,000 of bootleg CDs in 2001. I recorded concerts for 15 years. I knew a guy who'd go to a concert and he'd actually wear a stereo microphone clipped to his shirt, and he had it was a cassette deck that he could hide inside his jacket, and a cord that would go up, and he'd walk to the front of the stage and just stand there. Not the front of the stage, but dead center in the audience, just stand there. And you saw him and walked up to him. He'd like, because he doesn't want you talking on the tape. I've seen the guy all the time. Concerts. L. Grant Nelson, Kink. Played albums, and it jumped on me again. Don't forget Benny Hill, Robert Hansen. And, you know, Benny Hill was such a fascinating guy. He was very, very British. And a lot of Americans thought he was silly, but he was very, very funny. And he invented his own style of comedy. Like you would turn that show on and you immediately go, it's Benny Hill. And his sense of humor was so distinctive that it's hard to describe when somebody gets that stuff right. And of course, the story, and many of you have heard this, is that he was actually a relatively lonely guy. And so later in life, a woman wrote to him and said, hey, I'm wondering what you've been up to. I loved your TV show. I've always been a big fan. And he began a pen pal relationship with her. I believe he left his estate to her when he passed away. But the point is, he was such a funny guy. I love Benny Hill also. Yeah, Grant Nelson, Kink in Portland, Oregon, used to play entire albums. Alan Brown's Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special. Mark Miller, we only smuggled in beer. Oh no, this guy, and this guy had a collection of tapes, and then he had a dubbing deck, and he would trade tapes. He wasn't doing it for money. He was trading tapes with people from around the country. So he'd go see a show here, they'd go see a show there, and they would trade tapes. And the sad part is they weren't recorded that well. The recording quality was not that good. It's better than nothing. But I mean, I've seen videos of concerts now shot with a cell phone being held up like this that sound great. I mean, I'm shocked by how good they sound, but you know. Take America Back says, got to get in the sweet spot. Yeah, and that's the whole point. I mean, I once had fifth row seats to an Allman Brothers show at Pontiac, at Pine Knob, and I was like 3 feet from a wall of speakers. my right ear actually hurt by the end of the evening. And if I'd been trying to tape that, all you would have heard was this monster overdrive from this side, just overwhelming the microphone. So Aaron Freeman points out our two chief weapons are surprise, fear, and a fanatical devotion to the Pope. Hang on. We'll come back. Our three chief weapons. Josh Jogmina's always looking the bright side of life. And that song is quite catchy. And as I recall, There's a couple soccer stadiums that are famous for this, football stadiums in England, where the fans will break out into that towards the end of the game. Beata Graf off Del Hagen says they might be giants announced in their live shows. Flash photography is mandatory. Wasn't Metallica one of the groups that encouraged recording and said, if you want to bring equipment, bring equipment? Next thing you know, people have got like microphones and reel-to-reel recorders and mixing consoles and setups. I seem to recall that. They might be giants. I remember reading an interview with the woman who signed them to the record label deal. And as far as I know, there's only one song of theirs I ever heard. Well, no, don't Let's Start is one, but Birdhouse in Your Soul is another. But they didn't get a lot of airplay because they're considered alternative and whatever. But she said, I love these guys. They're great. But once they were signed, nobody knew what to do with them. But they were great. They might be giants. So Bubba Cleveland says, one of my best friends was Bob Seger's former pool boy. Can you get me a film deal? I'm curious, where was the pool? Do you know what city that was in? I actually know somebody who knew his personal agent. At that time, he had a place in Birmingham, Michigan. But I just realized that I haven't been drinking my fluids, and I went, why is my throat scratchy? Oh, because I haven't been drinking my water. Valerie Ann, Grateful Dead had taper sections. I forgot about them too. Yeah, they don't care. As long as people aren't pressing them and selling them, why would you care? D Woods, can't forget the Dirty Vicar sketch. Don't forget the church police sketch. There's a dead priest in the back alley. You should probably call the church. You should probably call the police. Call the church police. Bubba Cleveland says that was in Birmingham, but he says Bob was never at home. Yeah, I think he's moved since then, but it wouldn't surprise me. Birmingham's an interesting town. I grew up there in 1966. My family moved there. Didn't cost a lot to move there. Was not as hoity-toity as it is now. And over the years, it has grown into this thing with these monstrous Bigfoot mansions and stuff. And there are multi-million-dollar homes in some sections, and there's other homes that are small, like the one that my family and I spend our time in. It's still there, untouched like it was. But it's interesting because it was a neat little place. So Padre says Metallica was against music sharing on the internet because he didn't get royalties. Yeah, they were one of the people who was very upset by that the file sharing programs and so on. And that makes sense to me because that was direct competition with people buying the music. But I think they said that they didn't care if you recorded their concert and just listened to it. But I could be wrong. Bob Bong checking in from Niles, Michigan. Thank you for checking in. Carl's Corner. Hi, Steve. Better late than never. Reiner, man, how to defend yourself against a man armed with a banana. I went and saw the Holy Grail at a theater, which, by the way, is being torn down now. The Maple 3 Theater, which, by the way, is about a block or two from where Jimmy Hoffa got taken at Maple and Telegraph, and saw the Holy Grail there. But they showed as a preview to that now for something completely different, which was a slightly different version of some of the skits they had on TV. I think they were reshot or maybe they were unedited. I don't know. But I remember laughing so hard that my sides hurt. And that was before the Holy Grail started. And then when the Holy Grail started, I'm like laughing through the credits. And I actually had a discussion with somebody over the weekend about this, about literally in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when the movie started, like the actual movie started, there's already like 10 minutes of good comedy before that. So, Michael Cross, when do we get the pointed sticks? Oh, you think you're ready for pointed sticks, do you? Oh. Kurt says, hi, Steve. Didn't know Jay Leno was on that large steam engine that came through Iowa earlier this week. I would have told him you said hi. I know several people who told me they saw this gigantic steam locomotive, I guess, go flying by. I guess it's stopping in towns and stuff. It's a spectacle. And apparently Jay Leno has been on it, at least for part of that trip. He loves steam-driven things, so it doesn't surprise me at all. So, Madam Mel Estrange says, have you got any funding to develop your silly walk? And the funny part about that is that Monty Python, obviously John Cleese figures out that he could walk in such a way that you looking at him, you'd laugh. Like he invented this weird way to walk. He's a tall guy, but he walks. And then he thinks to himself, okay, that's not enough for a skit. We've got to do more with this. How do we do this? So he thinks it up and he goes, well, wait a second. The government has all these different programs and departments. What if they had a ministry of silly walks? Okay. It would be run by people who all have their own silly walks. But what would they do? Well, presumably they're the Ministry of Silly Walks. They're there to do something to promote silly walking. So they must fund and give people money to help them develop their silly walks. It turns into a political joke. It's funny. So, what else is Life of Brian, one of the best movies of all time? Yeah. Well, Riggs and the Life of Brian, we must laugh at ourselves. So don't forget there was another movie in there amongst those called Jabberwocky, which you never see anymore. And I think it was the same production people, but wasn't as funny as any of those other ones. So it's weird. I wasn't drinking anything up until 5 minutes ago. Now I realize I'm going to pay for that. So Lowell Riggs I Am says if we've learned anything from Monty Python, it's the best reason to do anything is for no reason whatsoever. Yeah. MHOA, John Cleese would have made a great first baseman. He missed his true calling. John Cleese is one of those great guys who, if you wanted to, could look very, very serious. And then he could be being silly 3 seconds later. And both of them made complete sense. And it's not often you see that in an actor. A lot of actors look serious and they always look serious. And then you have some that are so funny looking that they're always funny, I mean, in the sense of that. Just Me says, greetings from home, Finland. Those of you don't know, the Finns call Finland Suomi, and Suomi, roughly translated, means home or land. So, yeah, it comes full circle. Michael Lawless is Jay Leno, the same off camera as on absolutely. And I've first met Jay 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. Don't know the exact time. I could do the math, but I'm a busy man. But I've been to his garage 3 times. I've seen him elsewhere. I've seen his stand-up. I've been backstage at one of his shows. I've seen him at the Woodward Dream Cruise a couple of times. He is just a very nice guy. And one of the reasons his talk show hosting worked is that it wasn't an act. And we've all heard these stories about people who on camera are one way, the camera shut off, and they start screaming and yelling or whatever. Jay is the exact same guy off camera as he is on camera. So when he comes out, he doesn't have to pretend. He can just come out and have a conversation with somebody. And he's just a very nice guy. And I saw him at the Dream Cruise a couple weeks ago, walked up, said hello to him. We shook hands. I introduced him to somebody. And the first thing is he cracked a joke. It was funny, too. So, what else says super stoked John Cleese is coming to and performing live in Santa Cruz, California in November. Can't wait. I did not know that. Does he do stand-up or what's he do? Talk? D Universe, thanks for all your videos. Please keep it up. Whoop, whoop. So there you go. Paul's YouTube channel says, don't forget Faulty Towers. I'm sorry I did, but you reminded us. Thank you. JB, don't forget that during the Holy Grail, the animator suffered a fatal heart attack. Those mid-scene, like between-scene animations were hilarious. And that's the show jumped around. Don't forget, it also jumped to the present with the police chasing somebody because at the end of the show, they all get arrested at the end of the movie. Jonathan Rousseau says, what are your thoughts on the Mazda Miata? I don't have any thoughts on it. I've never owned one. I don't think I've ever driven one. I know people who have. I know people who love them. I know people who think they're the perfect car. For a long time, there were editors at Jalopnik and RoadTrack.com who said that the Mazda Miata was the perfect car. It was just everything put together perfectly. Driving experience, practicality, reliability, sportiness. And I can't argue with that. But again, I've never owned one, never driven one, so I can't speak to it. But thank you for asking. Mark Miller, didn't the animators get sacked? Well, I know the people doing the credits got sacked several times. So Sig226 says 97 Miata owner here, and their fun cars just get a manual transmission. Paul Harris says, Jay Leno, you can tell he's 100% genuine. When he's talking to the Ford Motor guy, Farley, he was asking questions that were not rehearsed and off the cuff, professional all the way. Yeah, and I mean, I've watched enough of his Jay Leno's garage videos where he just brings somebody in and there's a car there and they're talking about the car. And it's not rehearsed, it's not scripted. They're just talking. And for him to talk about cars is real easy, right? But you can just tell that's how he is. So Jim Haynes says Preston Tucker and Howard Hughes meeting. Question. Wife said they talked on the phone. Son said they did meet, and grandson said it never happened. I do not believe there's any evidence that the two ever met. In the movie, it suggests that they met in a clandestine situation, and Howard Hughes was eating pistachios. In fact, the movie is on cable right now on different channels. I've seen it a couple times that it's popped up in the listings. I don't believe they ever met. If they ever talked, I don't know. But you have to understand a lot of things about Preston Tucker were legends because, among other things, he either started the legend or he promoted the legend. And I'm not saying it in a bad way because it helped him get quite a long distance in life. But I don't believe, if you said, Steve, you had to put money on, did the two ever meet? I'd say no. But David Peterson says, if you type into Google, what is the air velocity? Google will auto-fill in of an unladen swallow. Valerie Ann Rex Foucher says, I love the Lumberjack song almost as much as I love John Prine. John Prine passed away not so long ago, but he put out a really, really cool song towards the end. And in the video, he's playing the guitar sitting in a chair, and it intercuts with a storyline of a older gentleman taking a younger girl by the hand and showing her things. And the implication is that the little girl's mother had overdosed. I forgot the name of the song. I'm having a mental blank. But if you remind me, I'd recognize it. Summer's End? Could that be it? And it's a fabulous song, and it's an amazing video, too. And John Prine is one of those guys. As a songwriter, a lot of other singer-songwriters know who he was. But he did not get a lot of attention the way he should have, sadly. And I think it's simply because he didn't have any gigantic hit records. Michael Lawless says, what's cable? Cable is shorthand for any of the pay services that put stuff up on your screen on your television, although probably excludes internet stuff. But it's like people will say, Steve, you can't film something with your camera phone or your phone camera. Yes, I can. Look up what the word film means in the dictionary. Mark Miller wants to know, is it an African or a European swallow? And that's the defining factor. We need to know that. What's your favorite color? What of John Prine was amazing. I saw John Prine the first time on Austin City Limits years ago. I'm flipping around and I see a songwriter, singer that I don't know. So I start watching, like, this guy's good. And I believe he had his own record label because I'm not sure if he had a hard time getting a record deal or he just got sick of the business. But he had his own record company. And I remember I bought a couple of his CDs and they're amazing. Just amazing stuff. So Cliff Ollinger says John Prine had a lousy agent. Did he have an agent? People out there don't have agents. Like Bill Murray, I don't think he's got an agent. I think he does everything himself. And occasionally, it causes problems. So Mark Miller saw Eric Johnson in Austin City Limits. I mean, I've seen so many different bands on Austin City Limits that it's amazing, the spectrum of stuff they've covered on that show. It really is. Lorraine Kopp says Jay Leno did a public service announcement for NBC about high school students making cars go 1,000 miles on a gallon. Do you remember that one? I don't. I don't remember the PSA. I do know there was a time when they were having competitions, high school and colleges, to build cars that could go as far as possible on a gallon of gas. So they do everything they could to, improve the gas mileage of the thing, streamline it, whatever necessary, and then, put a 1 gallon container on it and see how far you could get, just, driving it slowly and so on. So believe in yourself. So sometimes things get lost in translation. Yeah, it's a great movie too. Bill Murray's in. He's doing those commercials for the whiskey. Make it Tenturi time or whatever it was. Oh boy. Jerry C says Stevie Ray Vaughan in Austin City Limits is awesome. I've not seen that one. Harry Seldon says Elvis had the worst agent. Well, it's an interesting argument because Tom Parker was a character, and that's putting it very, very nicely. Tom Parker, turns out his entire made-up life story was BS. And he was basically just a guy who came along and said, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be big. And he signed Elvis Presley to an absolutely oppressive contract and then convinced Elvis that he was the one who made Elvis big. So Elvis stuck with the guy forever. And some of the things that Parker had Elvis doing were just idiotic. But, and also he's taking a gigantic cut, like an insane cut of the profits. So that was pretty sad. Chad Amsler, did you take your Cobra out for drive this summer? A few times. I rolled it over 1,000 miles finally. It's got over 1,000 miles. My Viper last year, I rolled it over to 10,000 miles. So this year, I rolled my Cobra over 1,000. So hopefully I'll get it out there a few more times. Canadian Robot Lady has asked me, have you made a Cobra ride video yet? Not officially, no. I've shot some of the stuff that I've posted, I think on Facebook and sent to a few friends and stuff, but nothing. I need to do the full video with the walk around and the narration and then the drive, which I will do one of these days. I've got projects, and unfortunately, I don't do them in order. I do them by priority, and that's been a low priority all along the time. So. David Chamley says John Cleese was a major owner of a horse ranch near me. Got a call to fix some laundry equipment. Talked to him about how the machines operated 15 minutes before I finally recognized the voice. Out of context, that's such a hilarious concept. You're talking to somebody, and of course, you're just hearing their voice. You don't see them, because if you saw John Cleese, you'd recognize him. So. Dan Boyd said I've rolled 100,000, 200,000, and 300,000, but never 400,000. I've never rolled 300. Like I said, I got 1 to 237, and that was it. But it was funny because I bought the Viper with 4,000 miles on it, the original owner, and I rolled it over 10,000 miles 2 years later, maybe 3 years later. It took me a while, but I'm not driving this thing on a daily basis. Robert Lee, do you have a picture of the Cobra? Of course I do. It's like asking a mother, do you have a picture of your baby? The problem is I've got to, come on. Now my phone's locking up on me. Hold on, let's see, where can I find the easiest thing? So here is a picture of my Viper when I brought it to Cars and Coffee not so long ago. And there's somebody. And let me see if I can find a better one. Oh, wait, hang on a second. There's a picture of Jay Leno climbing out of the turbine car at the Woodward Dream Cruise. Got all kinds of stuff on my phone. I should just do a video called What's on Steve's phone right now? Here, I'll show you one. I got a cool picture here. There's my Viper and my Cobra in my garage. How's that look? There we go. Okay. So, yeah. Do I have pictures? Yes, I've got pictures. So. Michael Lawless says, it's so crazy how few miles get put on performance cars a year. Well, the crazy part is I don't put that many miles on my regular cars in the sense I used to because number one, right now I've got 2 Ford Explorers and I alternate depending on the weather. If it's going to be lousy weather, I drive the old one, especially when driving on dirt roads. But I won't drive them in bad weather. And now I have to split my time between the two. So, Carl's Corner, do you have a picture of a woodchuck? I did actually get a picture of the woodchuck, and he's about 100 yards away. You can barely see him, but I had to dig for that one, so we'll see. Bob blah blah. Have you named your cars? I haven't. I'm not one of those guys who name. Now I understand boats get names, but I've never named a car. And I figure that the closest I get to that is I put a personalized license plate on my cars from time to time. But I never call them by name. I know people who do. If you want to, you can. It's just something I never got into. So I have not named my cars, but no, but I do have the license plates, personalized plates on them, or the vanity plates as they call them. So Lowell Crab says I didn't see any tools on the wall. Yeah, because you only saw 2 walls. You didn't see the other 2. I don't put things on the wall near my car so they might fall off and hit my car. W Parks, you chasing the woodchuck was the best. The funniest thing about that is I posted the video and I told the whole story. And I said, I had crazy thing happen to me last night. I tell the whole story. I went to the Gary Newman concert. I come back. There's a woodchuck in the garage. I'm chasing him around. And somebody said, too bad you don't have that on video. My first thought was, you think I videotape everything I do? And I'm like, wait a second. I've got a security camera out there. And I went and pulled. Sure enough, there's a picture of me. There's a video of me chasing the woodchuck. I completely forgot about it. I'm like, oh yeah. Alan Johnson had a 1995 Saab 900 that I sold over 298,000 miles as the original owner. Didn't that hurt though that you could have rolled it over to 300? Michael Lawless, had you ever met Rabbit from VinWiki? No, I did not. I've met Ed Bolian, but not Rabbit. I know he was a regular on that channel, but the day I was down there, I just met Ed. That was it. We went to lunch, shot 11 videos, and that was it. So, but his passing has been a big loss to the community. And some great videos. In fact, they put a video up of his funeral where a bunch of people spoke, including Ed Bolian. And it was an amazing service. I encourage you to go check that out. Go check out VinWiki. There's a bunch of stuff there about it. Dr. Mellestrange, first concert was Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. Have not seen them in concert. My first concert would have been a Beach Boys concert at Pine Knob back in about 1975 or 4, long time ago. NHSU, have you raced cars? Not on a track, nor on the road, because that would be against the law. J6, ever owned a motorcycle? No, I've never owned a motorcycle. My brothers have had motorcycles. I've driven motorcycles, ridden on motorcycles. I know a little bit about them. Never owned one. It's just one of those things. Just was never gotten into it. Padres says my truck now is named Goofy too. Is that because he had a Goofy 1? Probably, or just a Goofy. Harry Selden, how about a general Steve Lehto's garage video? Well, it would basically be the 4 vehicles. 2 are Explorers that nobody cares about. The Viper and the Cobra. Ginny Figueres, how do you stay cool in your garage? I'm dying at home. It's 100 degrees. Well, I don't spend much time out there when it's hot. Mark Miller, allegedly. I've got one story. I keep thinking I might tell the story at some major milestone, like 1 million subscribers or something. I've got one story that involves drag racing, allegedly, that I can tell somewhere down the road. There's a reason I'm not telling it, but it's one of those stories that a lot of people would be like, oh, Steve, that story is not true. And it's one of the rare stories I can tell where I can say, oh, no, it is true. And I can name for you right now 4 people who I still know who were there and witnessed it happen. So 2 of them are brothers of mine. and 2 of them are just friends I'm still in touch with. And I could say, you want to bet $1,000? I got 4 people who vouch for that story. So, but there's a slight issue that I'm not sure. I have to think about it. So, Alan Brown Sr. says, I thought you were in boxers. No, in that video, is wearing running shorts, which I'm not wearing right now, but I wear them a lot just because they're comfortable and handy, and it depends on what I'm doing. And I had to put something on fast because I was going to go outside, so I'm going to put something on, but I wasn't going to get all duded up, and slap on a suit and a tie or anything. So it was a t-shirt, running shorts, and shoes of some sort, probably sandals because they're near the door, but I don't know. Harry Sullivan, did you get rid of the military one? Yeah, I sold the M35 a long time ago. I sold the M35 deuce and a half in about 2008 or 9. So Dan Boyd saw Emerson, Lake, and Palmer at Riverbend in 86 or so. Where's Pine Knob? Pine Knob is in Michigan, Clarkston, Michigan. It's north of Detroit, about 45 minutes or an hour on I-75. But a lot of bands that play Detroit in the summertime play Pine Knob, an outdoor amphitheater, wonderful facility. I've seen some great shows there. This year, I've seen a couple shows there. And for instance, I saw Third Eye Blind there not long ago, and it's a great venue. Mark Miller says, whenever someone got too personal at work, I'd use the word allegedly. Yeah. There's an issue where if you, and again, hypothetically speaking for a friend, let's suppose you did something that was technically against the law, I don't know, 50 years ago, and you became a lawyer in the meantime, and you're practicing law, and you're trying to be a good person, and you would never do it now. But let's suppose hypothetically you did it 50 years ago. Is that a problem? And I'm not sure. I have to think about that. I've actually got 2 really good stories that I just simply can't tell. I wish I could, but I can't. Valerie Ann says, I named my cars. My last car was an Audi. I called it the trauma car or the beast because every time I drove that piece of junk, even 2 miles to groceries, something started going ding, ding. I hated it. Gordon Hall says, you need a cowbell to be placed on the shelf. I think I've got one. I don't see it. I had a cowbell right back there for the longest time. It was on the set for a while too. I had 2. I had a green one from the marathon, the Free Press Marathon that they handed out one year. And I had one from something else that someone sent me, but I've actually got a couple cowbells in here. Michael Lawless says, if you were arrested for excessive speeding, would the bar take interest? Well, that's the thing. If I did it now, hypothetically, especially if we got charged as a misdemeanor like drag racing. And so the question is would it be appropriate for an attorney to claim he did something before he's an attorney that would not look good if he's an attorney when he did it? It's a hypothetical. Hypothetical. Dan Boyd says that Audis are not known for stable electronics. Mark Miller says probably not statutorily an issue, but it could affect your reputation. That's literally what I'm thinking about. I know it's not a crime. If it had been a crime, the statute of limitations ran out 49 years ago. Mr. Black Omegon, most races happen in Mexico. That's an interesting thing. Is I wonder if I could take the story and remind people that it did not take place in America. Oh boy, Robert Lee, how about a dash-mounted cowbell? The problem with cowbells is after a while they get to be annoying. You can take about 3.5 minutes in one song. Dan Hale, would you ever try to buy another 69 Dodge Charger? Believe it or not, I've thought about it. I've also thought about cloning a Daytona, getting a 69 Dodge Charger and making it into a Charger Daytona. I wouldn't mind driving it because it wouldn't be real. The problem I have is that if I got a real Charger Daytona, I'd hate to drive it because they cost so much money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if I built one or had one built, I wouldn't mind driving it. You put miles on it, who cares? Put a crate motor in anyways, Michael Lawless, what's the fastest you've driven a car? Let's rephrase the question. What's the fastest you've been in a car when the car was traveling under its own power? I'd say probably $150, 150, 160, something like that. But again, that's traveling in a car. Reinerman says 125 allegedly. Sig226, 65 miles per hour. Honest. I've been just trying to keep up with traffic and I look down, I'm doing 90. I mean, it just depends on where you're driving. Someone told Valerie that was a seatbelt chime she heard in an Audi, and she says, I wish. The mechanic said he plugged it in and 36 codes came back. 36. And it will come back with faults in systems you've never heard of before, including really weird things like the trunk hinge stabilizer mechanism needs to be recalibrated. Got to take it back to the dealership for that. Pete Nicholas is 167. So anyways, it is 3 o'clock today, as of right now, where I am. Bob Lawas is a speedo, and my 84 GM says I was going 85. Remember back in the days when the GM speedometer was this wide and it just went like this all the way across the board? And it's just like 0 to like 75 or something over here. And it's like, why waste all this space for this big old speedometer? But then again, they had 85% market share, so they didn't care. So there you go. I'm done. I'm going to wrap it up, take off. I will try to do this again next Sunday, depending on what's happening. My schedule does look pretty good, but things happen. Until then, I'm getting tired. Until then, behave yourself. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.